as you love, you will see me in the stars. As you look up at the stars, I will be there.
I'm Monica Charette, and this is Holding the Light.
As long as you love, I will whisper in your ear. Little whispers you will hear. As long as you love.
Unlike sudden, unexpected child loss, parents of children with a terminal illness are given months, sometimes years, to prepare for their passing, if that's even the correct word, because no parent is ever prepared to bury their child. We wondered, when does a grief journey actually begin? Just 2 years since her son Jayden died from a brain tumor, Amber Poulin bravely answers that question. And she shares the heartwarming question she asked her son before he passed. What should your legacy be? Then she tells us how she is living that legacy. It's an amazing story of one mother's quest to ensure her son is never forgotten. Join us as Colby and I hold the light with Amber Poulin. Hi, Amber. Thank you for your willingness to share your love and loss today. It's been 2 years since the passing of your son, Jayden. Still very early in your grief, and I know it takes a lot of courage and energy to be here, so thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
So Amber and I knew about each other as grieving parents do in a small community, but we never actually met until the creation of a Facebook group called Maine Angel Moms. And I have to say, it's been a privilege to walk beside you and other mothers we have met. But let's start right there. Tell me, how has our online support group helped you in your grief journey and the subsequent friendships that have evolved since then?
Well, of course, the online support group has done just that and provided support and guidance to me in times of need. I hope lifelong friendships.
Yeah, it was really interesting how just a small group of us started actually talking and meeting, which I found extremely helpful.
Yes, yes. It's always comforting to know someone can understand a little bit of what you're going through where, the majority of your friends have no idea.
As much as they want to help you, they just don't
They
understand.
just don't understand.
Yeah. So, along that same topic, how do you feel about social media? I think you and I have talked a little bit about this, but how has it helped you in your healing and how has it been difficult?
Well, social media, first and foremost, is a blessing in that, you're able to see the memories, such as on Facebook. You're able to see the memories, specifically of my Jayden. But at the same time, it pulls at your heart, and the grief is stronger all over again. Every time a memory comes up, it's heart wrenching. And it's particularly hard in the times of area children that have milestones, driver license, weddings, first day of school, last day of school, graduation, those type of things. It's hard to see those milestones and know that my child will never achieve them.
I totally understand that. And you do have such joy for their families. You do,
Correct.
just like everyone else does. But it's so hard to process that your child will not have that and you will not experience it with them.
100%. Of course, I'm happy for them and happy for the children to have achieved that milestone. Yet, also, I remember that my son will never, and I will never, our family will never experience.
Yeah. So Jayden was just 11 years old when he was diagnosed
Correct.
with brain cancer. It's such a travesty, first of all, for him, of course, but
hmm
also for your family. What was that like initially, like receiving the news that your child had an aggressive disease that might take his life? What was going through your mind initially?
He had been sick for about 3 weeks prior to actually getting the diagnosis. I had to really be a huge advocate and be very proactive to actually get a diagnosis. So once he was actually diagnosed, I was in shock. I really didn't know what that meant, other than it probably wasn't good. It was at a local hospital, and they, of course, didn't have much information to provide me either. Of course, they were going to refer us out, and we had to wait for the referral to be made to get further information. So, initially, through the diagnosis, it was shock, scared, fear, and sadness. I had no idea what to expect when I was preparing as my they gave us some medicine, which in hindsight was not the correct dose. It was not effective to him, so he progressively kept just declining. I'm preparing and my family is preparing for the referral to be made to see a specialist for him to be treated and some type of treatment plan to occur. I'm using Google to do a bunch of research, and I had no idea what I was doing, of course, and came up with this plan that we were going to be in the hospital for 3 days while my son underwent brain surgery, which was completely inaccurate, but I had no idea. I had not talked to a specialist at that point, and in the end, we ended up going emergently to Boston Children's, one, because Maine, chose not to see him. It was too big of a case for them at the time, and we were told just to go straight to Boston because there really wasn't anything they could do for him here. So, before even the consultation was made, he we went to Boston Children's, and were seen in the ER, and subsequently, he had brain surgery 2 days later.
That's amazing. That must have been such a chaotic time for you.
Really, I was naive, and that was a blessing
Hmm.
in disguise. Being naive, I didn't really know what to expect. We were admitted on July 5th, and he had brain surgery on July 7th. July 6th, he declined very, very rapidly, that evening before his brain surgery, and really was a shell of himself. Come to find out, he had a brain bleed that was causing the declining of his stature. So, it was good that he was scheduled for surgery that morning. I honestly didn't ask and don't really want to know if we had waited for his consultation, if he would have made it.
So, like after the diagnosis sort of sinks in, then, and you start the treatments and you had surgeries, and what was most helpful for you? Do you remember that time? Or did anyone reach out?
While we were in Boston Children's and Jayden had undergone his 18-hour first brain surgery, we were in ICU, of course, for 3 days, which was typical. Turns out the person next to me in ICU was also from Maine, and her daughter was. We actually ended up having the kids ended up having the same surgeon.
Oh, wow.
They had different types of brain cancers, but they both had brain cancers, similar ages, both from Maine. We were both in Boston, like, very similar situations. So once I actually met her, she provided a lot of support in that there was another parent going through something very similar to what or what we were going through. So at that time, meeting her was a blessing. And then I absolutely loved Boston Children's Hospital. They, were very comforting and always very positive and happy to see us and provide us with anything that we asked for. Of course, my friends and family back home, were a source of support, although it happened really quickly, so a lot of them really had no idea what was happening, and I really kinda kept social media on the down low at that point
Hmm.
because it just was very traumatic for me, and I didn't wanna focus my energy on, updating Facebook at that point. I felt Jayden needed my attention, so, those friends that knew about Jayden's, diagnosis and surgery, of course, were a huge sources of support.
And so, in a previous episode, one of our guests sort of talked about some of the services she was able to provide our family after the loss of Cassidy. What are some things that your friends did for you or that the hospital did for you during the process of these treatments and these surgeries that you found to be very helpful?
Initially, of course, Jayden underwent 3 years of treatment, so quite a long time, and again, if you've never been through it, I think people tend to forget that it's 24 hours a day, 365 days a year until it's not.
Right.
So as time went on, support dwindled a little in the physical support. In the beginning, when we went to Boston quite frequently, and they would provide meals for us so that I didn't have to come home and cook. A few times, one friend in particular would always drop off some sort of gift when we would return. Maybe it be a plant or a meal or just a nice little uplifting saying, something really just to say, I'm thinking of you, I see you. So that was always nice. They were always there to provide support for my other son. He was home kind of parentless for 3 years. My mother, of course, took over the mother role for 3 years while we were in and out of the hospital and undergoing treatment, but, my friends were always on the ready to provide, Joshua with a ride to school or a shoulder to lean on or, something that he may need. If they were able to provide it, they were more than willing to do so.
That's great. Was there anything in particular that the school or some of these families around you, anything particular they did for Jayden that he found to be very comforting, or anything that people can do to somebody who is, going through these procedures and surgeries and things like that to aid in their spirits and whatnot?
So Jayden entered middle school. He was diagnosed in June. So come September, he entered sixth grade in the middle school, and then of course was in sixth, seventh, and eighth. So his whole middle school career, he was sick, and they were so very understanding and so very flexible with him. He, in the 3 years, only attended 3 days of school. Specifically, his 6th grade year, we were in Boston quite a bit for treatment, and so they, willingly set up a virtual classroom for him. They had never This was before the pandemic, so it wasn't like a technique that they had already utilized before. So at this point, they were more than willing to set up a virtual classroom for him so he could keep up with his studies and still remain a part of the class. So the middle school was more than willing to bend over backwards for Jayden and to accommodate him in any way that he needed. In addition to, when the 3 days he did go to school, they were more than happy to have him come for 10 minutes or for all day. Whatever he was comfortable doing, they were more than happy to have him come for whatever length of time he wanted.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do I recall there was also like a fundraiser for wheelchair accessibility or something?
Well, about a year and a half into his journey, he did become wheelchair. He needed a wheelchair. The last year, he became wheelchair bound. So, trying to achieve a wheelchair van is very, very difficult. They're very expensive and it's very difficult. I don't know that the school per se did a fundraiser for that, but I did have a few friends that did start a fundraiser, to hopefully achieve and raise some money for a wheelchair van. It just, in the end, just wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it seems like, the things that maybe helped you the most were logistics. And then for Jayden, it seemed like anything that you can provide to maintain some level of normalcy and inclusion in their everyday life was probably the most beneficial thing for him at the time.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
After his first brain surgery, he really wasn't the same child.
Mm.
He had some mobility issues, a slight brain damage. So he really became recluse. Before this, he was a very social child and was often referred to as the class clown in school. And after his surgery, he became really withdrawn and didn't want to see his friends any longer. So that was difficult in that he had many friends that wanted to see him and support him, and he just didn't want to. So trying to keep some type of normalcy or social interaction going was difficult for
Mm-hmm.
Jayden.
It must have been hard for you too, Amber.
It was hard to see my child fade.
Mm.
Yeah, knowing who he was before and knowing who he had become and why
Yeah.
was difficult. But when you're in the journey, you just put one foot in front of the other every day. Looking back is totally a different perspective than what I had going through it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going through it, we're just trying to survive.
So when we were talking about things that people did for you, I also recall that Jayden was the recipient of a Make a Wish.
Correct.
Can you share a little bit about that, what the process is like and how that benefited your family?
I think his oncologist mentioned it. I can't remember if his oncologist mentioned signing up for it
Mm.
or if I had just gone ahead and done it. There's another child in Sydney that is a survivor of brain cancer and was a good friend of mine. So in the beginning, I bounced a lot of ideas and a lot of support from her. And she may have mentioned the Make a Wish because her child also received a Make a Wish. Can't remember how the Make a Wish happened. However, paperwork was somehow filled out and referred, and I met with the lovely Make a Wish providers, and they came to the home and talked with Jayden and I about what he would like, what would be his ideal wish. And in the end, he chose to have a computer gaming system since he was huge into gaming. So they did that. They provided him with a fabulous gaming center, a desk and computer and monitor and lights and top of the line everything. And while that was being set up, a limo came and picked us up and brought us to lunch and then ice cream. And then he had a shopping spree at GameStop, all arranged by Make a Wish. And then we came home and it was unveiled for him, and he was smiling ear to ear.
Yeah, well, I see you telling me this story because we're on a Google Meets. It was just fun to see your smile because I can almost see Jayden smile
Yes,
when you're telling us this story.
yes. I have many pictures.
And how did your relationship with Jayden change during the 3 years? After his cancer diagnosis, your relationship had to have changed. You talked about changes in him physically and emotionally, but how did it change for you as his mom?
Jayden was always a mama's boy. He was always closer to me than my other son. However, once being diagnosed and we were in and out of the hospital, I would say more than 50% of the time.
Wow.
Sometimes lengthy stays, sometimes only overnight. We were in the hospital a lot. So I was the caregiver at that point in the hospital. So I spent literally 3 years, pretty much 24 hours a day with Jayden. So our relationship became close, whether he wanted it to be or not. He was kind of stuck with me and he became very dependent, I guess, on me, and he became very protective of me. In the end, when he was finally diagnosed with a terminal diagnosis, and even throughout the journey, I know he kept a lot of fears and anxiety away from me to protect me. He had that need to protect me as well as be my best friend, if you will.
Yeah. What was that time like for him in the last months? I mean, did you always or ever talk with him about the possibility that he may not survive this disease? That must have been one of the hardest conversations you've ever had with him.
Yeah. About year 2, in the middle of the night, we were in the hospital and options were dwindling. I think we were on treatment number 3. There just aren't a whole lot of treatments out there. We were on treatment 3 with maybe 4, one last treatment to try. And so he, at 2 a.m., said, "What if I die? What happens? I don't want to die." So I had to have the very hard conversation with my 12-year-old about dying. And it is no conversation that any mother should ever have with a child. It was very, very hard. Of course, I, as a mother, want to keep it together. And inside, I am just screaming and crying and scared. But I did have that conversation with him in year 2. And then, of course, when he was terminally diagnosed, three months before he passed, we tried to have the conversation of, what legacy does he want to leave behind? What are his wishes? What does he want? He really didn't want to talk about it. His response was, "I don't feel like I'm dying. I'm not going to die."
Hmm.
So, and then probably the last month and a half, he became pretty mentally incapacitated, so was no longer able to really coherently voice his opinions.
Wow, that time must have been excruciating for you.
There was a medical issue that happened. A pharmacy had wrongly prescribed some medicine to him and essentially overdosed him. So, due to that, he became very disoriented and hallucinated and showed all the signs of increased, brain tumor growth. We think due to the overdose, but he never kind of recovered
Hmm.
from that overdose. Whether it's coincidental or because of, we'll never know.
Hmm.
And so when it came time for that diagnosis, do you feel as though that was the beginning of your grief journey, or do you think it maybe had started a little before that?
When he was terminally diagnosed,
Yeah.
prior to his terminal diagnosis, I have to say I held hope 100% that he wasn't going to die. I remember we stayed in Boston at Christopher's Haven when he underwent the first time for radiation at Mass General. And I remember telling the worker at Christopher's Haven that it's fine, it's fine. He's not going to die. He's going to be fine. I had no idea or didn't want to know that he could potentially die from this. That wasn't going to happen to my son. No, he was gonna beat this. So when he was terminally diagnosed, yeah, I would say that's when my grief process started. But then, of course, I had Jayden telling me, "I'm not dying. I feel fine. I'm not gonna die." And so I then held on to the miracle and held on to, God, maybe Jayden knows something I don't, and God is going to save him. So it was the start of my journey, but still in denial at that point.
Hmm.
I literally was in denial until his last breath, literally.
And I'm sure some of it too is also you want to try to keep it together for Jayden and also for your other son.
100%.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah. Were there any opportunities for you to start healing in that grief that were made available to you when the terminal diagnosis was made? Were there support groups? Were there opportunities to go to therapy and things like that, or was that not something that was really presented to you?
I'm sure there were opportunities, nothing was presented to me.
Right. Shouldn't be
Yeah,
something you have to seek out on your own.
right. Nothing was provided.
Yeah.
His hospice agency did, after the fact, kind of throw out, that they had a support group, but not during. No, not really.
Especially when you think back to that moment in the operating room or the waiting room with that other mother, and just how comforting that was to be with somebody who was experiencing what you were experiencing. It's too bad that or that not necessarily any one entity, but it's too bad that that wasn't made more available to you to help you through this time.
100% agree. Yeah,
So Jayden died on June 15th, right, in
15th,
2020.
2020, yes.
Yeah. What ways do you think you need support that was different after his passing? Did that level of support change what you needed when you were in the hospital versus when he is no longer living? Because a lot of people start their grief journey after a child has passed.
Yes, and I think that's probably true for me as well. I have to admit that I don't think I'm very far in the grief journey. I'm still in denial. I wish there had been more support groups. I wish there had been more parents, moms, others that could relate to what you're going through, which was great when the online support group was founded because it's hard. It's hard to tell your friends what it feels like, what every day feels like when they can't fathom it, nor can they understand it. I really
Hmm.
think that unless you've gone through it, it's really something you can't grasp. So I wish there had been more support groups. I missed a lot. I miss my family at the hospital. They had become a second family to me. That's the only people I saw. I had a compromised child who really couldn't see outsiders and who spent a lot of time in the hospital. And so the staff at the hospital, the doctors, the nurses became my family because I saw them so much. And so when Jayden passed, that was a huge adjustment to know that I would never see them again and have that type of support. I don't think there was anything different that could change there, but that was a whole different type of loss.
Yeah, that's a very interesting perspective. I don't think a lot of people think about.
Yeah.
That's very isolating for you.
Yeah, it was very isolating, At any minute, you could be sent back to the hospital. If your child has a fever, if they have a bloody nose, if they're simply just not feeling well, off to the hospital you go. And for us, it was generally for a week, if not longer. So it's not like you go to the hospital and, get checked out and go home. It was usually a week-long admission. So it's hard to make plans, or was hard to make plans, so it can be isolating, yes.
And grief is so different and it changes with time. And as you said, you are very early in your grief. I remember someone saying that to me very early in my grief, and I know it has changed. And what have you learned about your own grief that you can share with others? And have there been any surprises along the way? Something you didn't expect at all?
Tough question, Monica. What have I learned along the way? I guess the one thing that I have learned is that life isn't guaranteed. I've learned more to live in the moment and to appreciate those around you and life in general. I guess I'm still hit with the daily sadness,
Mm.
and then the all of the sudden, oh my gosh, grief that sneaks up on you out of nowhere. I guess that's a surprise to me that all of a sudden, you can be going along and you're always sad and you always feel empty, but then all of a sudden you're just really heavy and you just want to curl up in a ball and sit in the corner for no apparent reason. So that is surprising to me, that how grief fluctuates
Hmm.
throughout the day, week, years.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned about that is how to allow myself to just go with that day. If it's difficult, to give yourself grace. I'm not going to be able to do what I'd planned today. Something has completely
Hmm.
overwhelmed me, and it could be something you saw or heard or just a memory that you need to let yourself grieve in that moment.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's so hard. Yeah.
Right. And I think if you try to resist it or just move past it or things like that, it only builds or prolongs that experience. And like you said, it can come at such a rapid onset, you don't even see it coming. And then all of a sudden you're almost debilitated. But to focus on that, let it happen, and obviously comprehend why and recognize that that's okay,
Hmm.
I think is important. And not enough people do that. They try to just kind of shove it down and keep moving. And that doesn't help anyone in the long run.
Right, right.
And as we said, we all grieve differently. How did this affect your family? I mean, certainly your other son. How did he process his grief, or how does he?
Jayden got sick right in very impressionable years of Joshua. He was 15 to 18. So
Mm.
just discovering his independence and, high school years and, graduating high school. So they were really important years in his life, that his brother was also sick. And yet he's trying to forge a path of independence on his own. As I said, he did have a 24-hour adult support. However, he chose to run a lot. He chose to be
Mm.
always on the go, not necessarily isolating around others, but running from the problem and not really processing it. And to be honest, I think that's how he's still coping.
Mm-hmm.
I don't 100% think he's actually, dealt with the emotions and or the loss.
Yeah, I do think that can be normal though, I think for some people at that age. I know I have a lot of friends who in their youth lost people close to them and it takes years before they really recognize how that impacted them, and sometimes it wasn't by their own will that they, ignored it or didn't recognize the ways in which it was
Sure.
affecting them, but just simply because you're at a young age and things are changing so frequently and there's always something to do, whether it be like extracurricular activities, homework,
Always a
sports,
distraction.
relationships, things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Mm.
And so it can be really easy to latch on to those for that feeling of normalcy. And those emotions while you're in them, it is good. All those distractions that I had were really great for me in high school, but I also was very thankful that I had some experience with therapy prior to that. And so was able to also deal with it emotionally
Sure.
as well.
Well, we don't ever want anyone to forget our children. We talk about this a lot. um, and you do some really special things to remember Jayden, one of which is an amazing foundation established in his memory. I wonder if you could share with us how that started and how it's helped heal your broken heart.
When Jayden was getting sicker, I asked him, "What legacy do you want to leave behind? What do you want?" Adina, the yellow lab, was his therapy dog. She would come to the hospital almost every other day to see him and always put a smile on his face. She just was his soul dog, if you will. And so when I said, "What type of legacy, what legacy do you want to leave behind?" He said, "Well, I'd like to give a dog to every cancer child." Clearly that isn't feasible.
Very honorable.
So we chuckled and I said, "Jay, that, we can't do that." And he said, I know, but if you're asking me, that's what I would like." Jayden's Warrior Pack charity was founded on his principle and desire to provide cancer children with pet care packages for their animals. So, children that are undergoing treatment for cancer, the charity sends out care packages for animals and for the children's animals, the family's animals. And there's always a little something for everyone in the family as well. So, it really was just to provide something a little different, to put a smile on these children's faces as they undergo treatment for something that is very hard.
And I'm sure that's not something that people really think about, that when there's so much travel going on, that if there is a family pet at the house, that child's going to miss that pet, and that there might be some issues with, the care for that pet. And so the ability to give that care package and to connect them to their furry friends back at home, or if they're receiving treatment at home, just to express that love with the animal is so precious. I think that's such a unique and wonderful idea
Thank
that
you.
Jayden had.
Yeah, that is awesome. So if people want to get involved with that, how can they get involved to support you?
So there is a Facebook page, Jayden's Warrior Pack Charity, and there also is a website, jadenswarriorpackcharity.org. Both are active, and you're able to donate directly through the website, as well as fill out a referral. The Facebook page has, upcoming events, and you're also able to contact the charity through Facebook as well.
Great. And we'll share that in our show notes for people. So, Amber, our last question is, we like to ask all of our guests, how would you like the world to remember your son?
First and foremost, I just want him to be remembered. I never want him to have died for nothing. My sole purpose is to get his name out there, raise awareness for childhood brain cancer, and to make the journey for some of these children undergoing treatment for cancer a little easier. Yeah, first and foremost, I just don't want him to ever be forgotten. He was a strong, courageous person. He was the most strong, courageous person I have ever met, child or adult. And, he never said no. He underwent all the treatment that was put before him with a smile on his face. If anyone's ever undergone cancer treatment, it's not easy. It's not easy. All the time in the hospital, countless surgeries, countless MRIs. I mean, I just, the list goes on with all the medical treatment that happens and the complications that happen. And, he did that all with positivity and a smile.
Yeah, it really does sound like Jayden, and I wish I could have met him, because he sounds like he had such a passion for life. Like you said, he was courageous and brave. It sounds like he had such a bright light, and it's clear to see where he got all of those things from, having talked to you today, and just how amazed I am with your courage to continue to shine his light, and your compassion, your empathy for others that have had to experience some of the awful things that you've had to.
Thank you.
Amber, I just want to say, too, that I'm very grateful for our friendship.
Totally agreed.
Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
As long as you love.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this podcast helpful, please share our link with others and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. I'm Monica Charette, reminding you that you are never alone in your grief. Until next time, we'll be right here with you, holding the light.
As long as you love.